I'd love to hear a little bit more from each of you about kind of the biggest barriers to entry in the fashion world as a sustainable startup, and maybe your biggest win and your greatest challenge thus far. And yeah, feel free to just, speak amongst yourselves as well. I'm sure there's a lot of overlapping stories here.
I think that, and this touches slightly on what Chloe was saying about there is not one size fits all to a sustainable approach to making a garment or a shoe or any product really. And so I think, there's also a lot of greenwashing in the world. And I think one of the biggest challenges and barriers to entry for people who are setting out to create a sustainable business from the start is to really finding, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? Are you trying to deal with end of life? Are you trying to deal with recyclability? Are you trying to deal with pollution? Are you trying to deal with, health issues? Like there's so many problems that you can tackle with respect to just creating one item or one garment. And so I think it's really just education. And until a couple, really recently, I think that the access to sustainable fibers, sustainable alternatives was really high barrier. And that was really just getting suppliers across, the mindset to not just focusing on the bottom line and making the cheapest product at the biggest, mass volume as you can and delivering it as quickly as you can. And I think that that's like a re-education of consumers' minds, but also suppliers' minds, and then your vendors' minds as well. And yeah, so I would say do your research, pick a problem that you're close to and really try to invest in the education around that, and look for innovations that are specific to that problem.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Cayla. And I think in the early days for me, one of the biggest barriers was really finding the right production partner. And when you are a small startup and you're seeking out someone to make a product for you, especially when you don't have any experience in doing so, it can be very overwhelming. And so I went through probably 5 or 6 different factories before I landed at the factory that I'm currently at, which when I hear people are like, oh yeah, I'm at the same factory. When I started, I'm like, wow, that's amazing, because that was not my experience. And so that was very, very troubling. And in the early days, I was also the production manager basically, because it was sort of a one-woman show for a couple years. And I was the one going to these factories 3 or 4 times a week and sort of troubleshooting all of these issues. At Mate, we make everything in Los Angeles within a 10-mile radius of our office, which is amazing because it's super, super localized. And I think it was sort of structured that way in the beginning because I was literally having to drive around to all these places that I couldn't imagine doing anything else, And now I think one of my biggest pain points sort of shifting in terms of challenges is really how to grow a team. And this is what I'm really focusing on right now, because we as a business are 3 months ago, we're in a very different place than we are now. And how do you hire for that? Which is a struggle, because we've had so much growth in a very short amount of time. So I'm always thinking okay, do you hire 6 months from now of who you think could fit in that role? Or it's kind of complicated. But that's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of challenges that I'm facing.
To build on that and build on it as well. But for us, the biggest barriers to entry, if you say you're going to start a sustainable business or brand, and you both have mentioned manufacturing, and I would take that and build on that to just supply chain in general. And actually, Cayla, you mentioned material sourcing. The reason sustainability and sustainable fashion has been price prohibitive and inaccessible has really been because there hasn't been an incentive at the manufacturer or sourcing level to get fiber costs down until recently. And I think a lot's going to change in the next 10, 20 years with biofabrication, cellular agriculture, fiber regeneration, recycling, recapture, all of that. Because finally there are economic incentives for companies to start investing there. And you've even seen with prices of things like organic cotton or Better Cotton Initiative changing drastically in the last 2-3 years. And so, and that, the good news is that is directly impacted by consumer demand. And so, you know, now there's consumer demand for sustainable clothes, younger generation in particular is voting with their dollars, and manufacturing and supplier capabilities catching up. But at the same time, I think something that's tough for Stuart and I is we came from a sourcing background and a supply chain background and living in China and hacking away at it. And like, we didn't have real experience initially, like from bigger companies and bigger businesses. It was a passion project, but it did take us, you know, 4 years really to get to the point we're at today, and 2 years on our first prototype. And so it, you know, like to really build supply chains, build proprietary materials and work with suppliers and build, you know, what we would consider truly sustainable front end and end of life supply chains it takes a lot of time, money, and investment. And in knowledge, we were really fortunate to have a really fantastic advisory board and team early on with industry expertise.
Yeah, I also think one of the other big challenges has been getting bigger partners on board and bought into the mission and vision.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've kind of always indexed on, and production in particular. And even when you get people bought in, they're still like, it's an ongoing process. Like we don't use leather in our products. And when we were going through initial testing and R&D, there was a durability issue to start, because things would be laminating and we had to figure out the right product, like adhesives that could also be separated at end of life. And probably once a week, I'd get a phone call from our production partner. I was like, hey, I've got this great new material. It's this great leather. What do you want to use it? And we'd be like, no, like we don't really use leather. And then he'd be like, I got this other one that's like, vegetable tan leather. And it's like, no. Like, so it's like a constant like relationship management process, and like getting people caught up and on board. And I think hiring is an interesting thing to kind of flag here. And I would build on that, and also say like the way that we communicate out to our teams, and realizing that like things are changing and evolving and growing so quickly, and like making sure that we're being deliberate, not only just communicating out to like our core team and who's on our like Slack channels, but our production partners and our sourcing partners, and like what we're thinking about 12 months down the road, and making sure that everybody's kind of all on the same page.
All of you shared challenges and none of you shared the biggest wins. And I just want to say, as a customer of all of your products, that's your win, is your great product.